heard something. Yeah. Good stuff. Really? That's something I've had to consider. Alright. Yeah. Welcome to Midnight Man's afternoon play and read time, where we either chill and play video games or read a nice erotic novel. I'm MidnightMan, the voice of midnight, and we're going to read some erotica. I'm gonna read from this book called Tamed, a sci-fi alien warrior romance. I think it was in the midst of chapter 3 or chapter 4. But without further ado, let's get started. Who's ready for me? She managed to ask as the woman extended long fingers to her to pull her up. The show. The woman looked down at her once she hoisted her to her feet. Of course, she already looked perfect. They told me you did. I don't have to do a bit of work on you, do I? It's not the case with everyone they bring up, let me tell you. Mandy couldn't help flushing from the compliments, even if they were from the strangest creatures she's ever seen. Up close, the woman's dramatic eye makeup made her already large, cat-shaped eyes look almost gold, and her skin appeared pale gray under the lights. Mandy felt slightly relieved that she hadn't needed to rely on this woman for a makeover. Remind me again what show I'm doing? Mandy said, as blue hair prodded her out of the room and down the hallway. Am I going crazy? Or is it really the dating game? The woman grinned and bobbed her head up and down, her tall twist of hair swaying as she did. Don't worry about a thing, sweetie. You'll be a natural. Just answer the questions and smile a lot. Oh yeah, almost forgot me. There we go. Mandy could see the glare of stage lights ahead of them and felt a flutter of nerves. Is there a studio audience? Blue hair shook her head. Close set. And do I really have to go on a date with a stranger? Something flickered behind the effusive woman's eyes. If you're picked, you'll be in for an experience you could never have imagined. She patted Mandy's hand as they reached the edge of the set. It's not like you have anything to lose or to go back to, right? Before she could ask what exactly the woman meant by that, she was being rushed across the stage and plopped into a high stool between two other women who looked equally dazed. The lights pointed at them were so bright, Mandy couldn't see a thing beyond the curved edge of the set. Blue hair gave her hand a final squeeze. My name's Raina, and I'll be right over there if you need anything. After the woman hurried off, Mandy twisted around to look at the set. Brightly colored 70s-style starbursts plastered the wall. For a remake, they hadn't done much remaking. Either they dug this old set out of a warehouse somewhere, or they were going to the so kitsched it's cute theory. I'm Trista, the blonde woman next to her whispered, while leaning closer. Mandy took in her competition's wavy hair and blue eyes. She was pretty but wore almost no makeup and, as far as Mandy could tell, didn't have any product in her slightly frizzy hair. That was odd for LA, and even odder since they were about to be on TV. Mandy. Her voice sounded shaky, and she reminded herself that it was just a game show. Bridget, said the light-skinned African-American woman on the other side. Mandy shook her manicured hand and was struck by the woman's genuine smile, clearly not from LA. Loud theme music filled the air, and the lights on the side of the set were dark. Mandy felt another flood of nerves and then rush of doubt. What on earth was she doing on a game show? The same day her best friend dumped her and her father cut her out of his life. What had seemed flattering when the talent agent had suggested it now seemed like a really bad idea. She looked around her, oh my eyes. She looked around her in the dark. She could sneak off without walking into a wall or getting caught. She spotted the silhouette of Rena off to the side. Not a chance she'd make it past her. She took a deep breath. She'd just have to get through the taping and hope the show never got picked up. "Are you ready to play the dating game?" A man's voice boomed as lights illuminated the other half of the stage. The parts separated by a partition. Canned applause filled the set, and Mandy tried not to roll her eyes. Could this show be any cheesier? She felt grateful for once she didn't have her phone. She did not want to Instagram or Snapchat 1 second of this. "Now, let's meet our contestants," the voice continued as their side of the stage lit up although Mandy couldn't see the host of the show. "First up, we got Trista. She's from Iowa and loves biking and watching rom-coms." More clapping, and Mandy's heart beats faster. "Next up, Mandy from Los Angeles is a social media influencer who loves shopping and SoulCycle. Let's give it up for Mandy." The same canned applause as Mandy forced herself to smile and wave. Where had they gotten her interest? She hadn't done SoulCycle in months. And last but certainly not least, give a warm welcome to Bridget from Miami, a former dancer with the Miami Ballet. Bridget loves Cuban food and running on the beach. Mandy attempted a gracious smile as she clapped for her competition, but she couldn't help feeling like Bridget had just blown her and Trista out of the water. A professional ballerina? Any guy with half a brain would pick Miss Limber in a heartbeat. She glanced at the pretty woman with a wide smile. Hell, she'd pick her. "Now that we've met our lovely ladies, let's start with the questions," the announcer continued, after barely a breath. "Bridget, how would you describe your perfect man?" The sides of Mandy's mouth quivered as she tried to keep her fake smile from slipping. This was pointless. Mandy knew she was going to come out looking like an idiot. Her face burned at the idea of her profession as an Instagram influencer being put up alongside a professional dancer. And not just any type of dancer. A professional ballerina. Someone who'd actually done something with her life. She felt tears threaten to flood her eyes. This was a setup meant to make her look bad. They clearly needed her as a seat warmer. She heard Bridget saying something about a sense of humor and a kind heart, but she was barely listening. "Mandy?" The same voice pulled her away from her growing humiliation. "Same question to you. Describe your perfect man for us." Well, if they thought she was going to simper and smile and give sweet canned answers, they had another thing coming. If she couldn't win this thing and come out looking like a star, then she was going to make sure it was unusable. She tossed her hair off her shoulder. "First of all, he have to be hung." She heard Trista suck in the air next to her, while Bridget laughed. The announcer faltered, "Ooh, okay. Why don't we move on to, and aside from having a mega cock, he should have abs I can file my nails on, and an ass that won't quit." She batted her eyelashes, if I'm being totally honest. She heard a deep rumble of laughter from the other side of the partition. She almost forgotten there was a bachelor on the other side listening to their answers. Come to think of it, why hadn't they heard from him yet? Wasn't he usually introduced right away, too? She slid off the stool and tugged her snug dress down and as it rolled up. "As a matter of fact, why don't I check him out right now? I mean, he's right behind this wall, right?" There was a murmuring and gasping as she strolled across the set and stepped around the dividing wall. But instead of a nervous-looking bachelor sitting on a stool on the other side, there was a towering man in a military uniform holding what looked like an iPad. Not only was he tall enough to have played in the NBA, he had the broad shoulders of a linebacker. His honey brown hair was short, and he had eyes greener than any she'd ever seen before. A shade a shade of emerald she didn't think you could even get from colored contacts. The flooding lights snapped off, and overhead lighting suspended from exposed piping in the ceiling illuminated set. She spun around, looking out toward where the cameras should have been positioned. Nothing. No TV cameras. No crew manning them. No nothing. Only high white walls and a set of large double doors with no handles. "What the hell is this?" she asked, as the door slid open and a huge man burrowed into the room. "Exactly what I want to know," the man shouted, his voice reverberating off the walls and making someone squeak behind her. His green eyes blazed with anger as he stomped past her, running a hand through the nearly black hair that curled around the nape of his neck as he faced off with the other man. "What do you think you're doing, brother?" The other man clapped him on the shoulder and mentioned with his head to Mandy, "Selecting your mate, of course." Mandy gave her head a small shake. "Mate? This might be a cheesy dating show, but who talked like that? Seriously, what's going on? This clearly isn't a TV set, and we're not here for a taping of the show." She crossed her arms over her chest. "You assholes have 2 seconds to explain what's going on before I call my father and have his lawyers rip you to shreds." Both men stared at her, one smiling and the other glaring. The man who stormed in was as tall and built as the first guy, and Mandy found herself tipping her head back to meet their eyes. Their almost identical green eyes. "You must be joking, Cax," the man said. "And you know I never found your jokes amusing." "No joke." Cax tapped his fingers on the tablet in his hands. "I took the liberty of choosing you, since I knew you would refuse to do so yourself. It's all settled." "You can't do that!" Cax tilted his head. "Actually, as the eldest family member, I can. It's time for you to step up and fulfill your family duty." Mandy stamped her foot. Were these guys really ignoring her? "That's it. Where's my phone? I'm calling an Uber." Neither man looked at her, so she marched over and slapped the arm of the angry one. "Hey, you! Conan! I'm talking to you!" His eyes slid to her, and she stepped back when she saw them narrowed in barely controlled fury. There was something not human about those eyes, aside from the color. The panic that had been teasing the back of her mind started to increase, and she did what she always did when she was scared. She went on the attack. "I swear to God, I will sue every one of you people if you don't give me a car headed back to Beverly Hills within the next 5 minutes." The doors slid open again and several more men entered, but Manny's attention was drawn past them to the door of the hallway beyond it. Looks like it was lined with curved windows that ran halfway down the down the walls. She squinted and her mouth went dry. Even though it couldn't be later than mid-afternoon, the sky outside the windows was nearly black, and part of a huge cratered surface rotated towards them. If she didn't know better, she'd say she was looking at a moon close up. Mandy took in the abnormally large men in a type of military uniform she'd never seen before. The woman with blue hair and bizarrely long fingers, and the waist-high robot that zoomed across the floor toward the 2 men, took the tablet from the smiling one and zipped out of sight. She didn't know where she was, but suddenly, she had a pretty good feeling it wasn't L.A. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Dorn had the urge to throw his older brother out an airlock as he had stalked behind him down the corridor. But unfortunately for him, the ridiculous mock game show set had none easily accessible. "I know you're upset, Cax. I know you're upset," Cax said. But when they reached the empty room, his brother had referred to him as the green room. Dorn took a second to absorb the fact that the room his brother insisted they go into for privacy wasn't green at all, and it smelled like an odd combination of scents he never encountered before. He wondered if these were human smells as he raked both hands in his hair, and his brother sank down to one of the couches. "Really? I'm surprised you noticed or cared." Cax tried to assume a hurt face. Of course I care. That's why I'm doing this. Dorn ignored the earnest expression he knew was manufactured to elicit sympathy. Please don't try to tell me you're forcing me to take a mate I don't want for my own good. Cax leaned forward and rested his hands on his knees. If I don't assert my right as head of the family, you'll never take a mate. You'll stay out there on the outskirts of the galaxy fighting the Chronok until you die. Dorn paced across the room, trying not to focus too much on the battles he might be missing, or the annoying music being piped into the room above his head. Was this what Earthlings listened to? He grimaced at the high-pitched instrumental notes. Sounds good to me. Cax let out his breath in a loud sigh. You may not care about your responsibility to your family name, or your people's survival, but I do. Dorn stopped short. You're accusing me of not caring for my people? I've destroyed more Chronok ships than any other commander in the fleet. I've kept hordes from both invading our home world and enslaving these Earthlings. I'm not taking away from what you've done as a commander. Cax stood and crossed to his brother, placing a hand on his shoulder. But if we don't create the next generation of Drexian warriors, who will fight them when we're gone? Dorn shook off his hand. There are plenty of other Drexians who want to mate with these creatures. I know warriors under my command who would go to sleep every night with balls so blue they're purple, imagining the Earth woman they claim. Pick one of them. Cax took a few long-legged steps toward the table set up with food and chose a chocolate-covered ring, examining it before taking a tentative bite. He nodded as he swallowed. The Earth people certainly like their sugar. The Earth people certainly like their sugar. He dropped the rest in a nearby trash can. Young warriors aren't descended from the elite class like we are. It's our duty to produce the next generation of our people's leaders. You know that as well as I do. Dorn grunted in response but didn't reply. He didn't know their duty. Their father had drilled it into both of them since they were boys. They were one of the high families, purebloods of House Barat, the elite class that served as commanders and generals and members of the high command. Their own father had been a noted warrior who ended his days ruling the high command, and he'd expected both his sons to do the same. Dorn didn't allow himself to think about his father often, and when he did, all he could recall was a cold man who disappeared into himself after his mate. One of the rare, naturally born Drexian females had died giving birth to Dorn. Not even his older brother remembered what their father had been like before he shut himself off. Cax had only been a year old himself. Neither brother recalled their mother or knew anything but a cool distance from their father. It was one of the reasons Dorn had no interest in finding a mate. If losing one could hollow out a warrior as great as his father, he wanted no part of it. Dorn pushed the painful thoughts from his mind, as he usually did. Why don't I see you picking your own mate? Cax flinched and didn't turn from where he faced the food table. Bad news, little brother. Our family dynasty is going to fall to you, and you alone to continue. You remember that weapons transport vessel I tracked down and destroyed a few years ago? Sure, Dorn said, his eyes not moving from his brother's back. The Chronoks lost a significant number of bombs intended for battle. You saved countless Drexian lives. He tapped his foot on the floor. I was there at your medal ceremony. Cax spun around. Turns out all the radiation from the weapons was destroyed had more of an effect on me and my crew than we first knew. Crack. Dorn took a few steps back, his stomach plummeting. You aren't here to tell me you're dying, are you, you bastard? Cax laughed darkly. At least I can count on you not to coddle me. He gave a quick shake of his head. No, I'm not dying, but my chances of reproduction are very slim. Dorn felt a flood of relief, which was quickly replaced by a feeling of dread. So you're saying I'm the last of our lines? I'm sorry, Cax said, and Dorn could hear in his voice that he meant it. Okay, fine. He allowed his eyes to close for a moment, and he absorbed the news. I get it. I need a mate to carry on our line. But why did you pick for me? And perhaps more importantly, why did you pick her? Cax laughed again, and this time his eyes danced with merriment. What? You don't approve of the female I chose? She's very visually appealing, Dorn. Young, pretty, nice, round breasts. Even if there are only 2 of them. And she's got spunk. She's a shrew, Dorn said, feeling the urge to throttle his big brother once again. Did you see what a scene she made? I saw her hit you, Cax said, winking at his brother. I thought you need someone with some fight in her. Now it was Dorn's turn to laugh. Fight? She's clearly a spoiled earthling who's used to getting everything she wants. She's not suited for life with a Drexian warrior. You sure you're not worried about her demands for a monster cock? The corners of Cax's mouth twitched up. She said she wanted a monster cock. Dorn gaped at his brother. In front of everyone? Cax nodded, apparently enjoying every moment of his brother's shock. And an ass that won't quit. That's a direct quote. Dorn felt heat rise up his neck. Oh, nice. That's right. You can rent this book for free. Yeah, it is. I bought it off of Amazon. It was like $3, and plus it got me part of the Kindle Unlimited. So there's always that. Dorn felt the heat rise up from his neck. He'd never heard of a female demanding such things. Is this how Earth females talk? Not from what I've seen before. I think this one's special. Dorn threw up his hands. Great. First you insist on picking a mate for me, and then you pick the shrillest, most demanding, entitled one from the entire planet? What am I supposed to do with a spoiled creature like her? There was a gasp from the doorway, and Dorn spun around to see the Earth female, his new mate, according to Cax, standing in the doorway next to a blue-haired Vexling. Her eyes were wide, and he saw a flash of hurt before they burned with anger. Before he could say a word, she turned and ran down the hall with blue hair close to her heels. Thanks, Tamed. Appreciate the goo. A stab of regret twisted in Dorn's stomach. Cax shook his head slowly and rested his hands on one of Dorn's shoulders as both men stared at the empty doorway. It's a good thing you enjoy a challenge, brother, because I think you have your work cut out for you. Chapter 6. Mandy stormed down the hallway with no real idea where she was headed. She just knew she had to get away from here, wherever here was. How dare that big brute call her demanding and entitled and, what was the other word he used? Shrill, that was it. She wasn't totally sure what shrill meant, but she knew she wasn't it. It had stung to hear him say aloud what she feared people thought of her. The same words she heard from her father say about her when he talked to her mother. At least this asshole hadn't called her a spoiled brat. Tears stung the back of her eyes as she remembered hearing the awful things her own parents had said about her. The worst part had been the laughing. Her mother and father had actually laughed when they compared war stories about her tantrums. Sound effects for... Pathetic cries for attention, her father had called them. Maybe they'd just been, Manny thought. Not that they'd ever worked. But this guy didn't even know her. How dare you assume he knew anything about her, from seeing her for all 2 minutes? To be sure, not the best 2 minutes either. What she should do was march right back into that room and tell him what she thought of him. He was clearly a big bully who was used to getting his way and insulting anyone he wanted. She thought of him towering over her with his massive muscles and his intense green eyes. As much as she wanted to kick him in the nuts, she had to admit he was hot. And she normally didn't go for guys with shaggy hair and a couple of days worth of stubble. Of course he knows it, she thought. I bet he's full of himself and he's rude. What an ass, she said, feeling a bit better as she convinced herself how little his opinion should matter to her. Rena hurried after her as she walked, chirping explanations and excuses in her high-pitched voice. I'm sure he didn't mean that, sweetie. You know how males can get, especially those bad boy warriors who fight on the outskirts too long. All the space battles have probably addled his brain, the poor dear, but he's a looker, isn't he? A little rough around the edges, perhaps, but there's nothing we can't... Mandy blinked and stopped so suddenly Rena bumped into her. Did you say space battles? Rena's slightly gray skin paled, and her wide eyes grew even rounder. No, I meant Earth battles. I think he's been fighting in the trenches in France. Mandy crossed her arms, drumming her polished fingernails against her bare skin. There are no wars in France. She paused as she thought back to the high school history classes she practically slept through. At least, I'm pretty sure there aren't. That happened. She didn't remember exactly when, but she knew it was before cell phones and social media. Well, a seriously long time ago. This girl's in her head for sure. Rena glanced around the empty hallway as if searching for someone to rescue her for a door to run through. She put an arm around Mandy's shoulders. Why don't I take you to the fantasy suite? It's where you'll be staying. And you're gonna love it, hon. I chose the South Pacific bungalow for you. Rena propelled them forward as she babbled on. I took one look at you and knew you were a warm weather type gal. The Swiss chalet is nice, but when you've got a figure like yours, why cover it up in those fuzzy yarn shirts? Yarn shirts? You mean sweaters? Mandy asked. Sweaters! What a funny word. Rena beamed at her, the blue-gray tones returning to her face. Mandy's anger was fading, but her confusion was not. I'm sorry, this was fun and all, but I have no intention of going to a fantasy suite, even if it's in the South Pacific. This isn't The Bachelor, and I didn't sign up for any of this. Actually, Mandy, you did. A woman in a white suit with silver hair swept into a sleek bun approached, her shoes clicking like a metronome against the floor. When she reached him, she didn't stop or even slow. Rena, bring her with me. Mandy followed Rena, who was momentarily speechless, and the woman who appeared to be in charge. Finally, she thought, this must be the studio exec. Once I explain who my father is, I'll be out of here. The older woman swept through a series of doors that swished open as she approached, until they finally reached a room that could have been a corner office at MGM, aside from the fact that the shades were drawn on the large windows. A dark wood desk took up a part of the room, with a pair of beige leather chairs angled across from it. The only thing missing, though, thought Mandy, was a bookshelf filled with Emmys or Golden Globes or SAG statuettes. Rena stared her into one of the chairs as the woman took the seat behind the desk. I'm Director Crean. I'm sorry. Hold on, let me get some water. Oh, my eyeballs. Yeah. All right. Excuse me. I'm Director Crean. She snapped open a metal portfolio she'd been carrying and pushing it across the desk toward Mandy. Is this your signature? You're a director, not a producer? Odd to have a director running a studio, but clearly not the only weird thing about this place. The woman didn't respond, so Mandy glanced at the familiar loopy letters illuminated on the tablet screen and nodded. Isn't that one of the releases I signed? Exactly. The director pulled back the screen. I'm happy to give you a copy of what you signed, but suffice it to say, you did sign up for this. Mandy let out a breath and a laugh. Well, I didn't know what I was signing. No one reads those things anyway. They should. The woman didn't laugh with her. You have signed a binding contract to become a tribute bride. Your signature is a formality, of course. Your planet has given us the authority to procure the females we need, provided we select individuals with no strong family ties or close social networks. Mandy stared at the director, not sure which of the ridiculous statements to question first. She went with the most obvious. No social network? I have thousands of Instagram followers. I'm an official influencer. Now the director smiled, but it made Mandy want to rub her arms for warmth. I mean, genuine social connections. Real people who would miss... I meant general social connections. Real people who would miss you. You have none of those. Mandy opened her mouth to argue, but felt like she had the wind knocked out of her. Did she really have no friends who would miss her? As of earlier that day, London wouldn't. Her loser boyfriend had broken up with her, not that she cared. Her father had cut her off via an article in Vanity Fair, and her mother hadn't contacted her in over a year. The director continued talking, but Mandy only heard the voice as if it was coming to her underwater, the words echoing in her brain, but not making sense. She watched the woman's mouth moving, but couldn't digest what she was saying. Something about it being an honor to be a tribute bride, and how life on the station had been designed with human pleasure in mind. When the director mentioned how happy she would be to be chosen as the mate of one of the most noted warrior families, Mandy felt herself resurfacing. Are you telling me I signed up to marry a stranger, and it's that big pissed off brute who was yelling on the TV set? Raina put a hand over her mouth to stifle a nervous giggle, and the director shot her a look. Doran is one of the most lauded warriors in the Drexian world. The director straightened up as she spoke. Drexian? Mandy looked at Raina. Whose plastodon whose plastodon smile had gotten even wider. What do you mean, Drexian? What are you, aliens? Really? Then how can I understand you perfectly? You speak English? The director steepled her fingers. You were fitted with auditory implants, equipped with universal translator capability. Nice. Hold up. It looks like some frames are skipping. Let's take the drop frames. Some frames have been uploaded. The problem usually is poor network connection. Check the health of your connection. Hold on just a moment. I need to check some things. Because for some reason, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's like ping looks good. Let's see, speed looks good as well. I don't know why it's dropping so many frames. Your stream is experiencing minor issues. I'm supposed to have a better upload speed than that. Possibly. I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Mandy touched her fingers behind her ears and felt 2 paper-thin lines of raised skin. Healed wounds she didn't have before. She shook her head, then swung her attention to Raina. Come to think of it, the woman really didn't look human. That didn't mean she was an alien, Mandy told herself, or that any of the crazy lady behind the desk was true. When was this supposed to happen? I was having lunch at Beverly Hills a couple of hours ago. Actually, that was 24 hours ago, the silver-haired woman said. Your implants were fitted on the journey here, but you were unconscious the entire time, so you wouldn't remember. 24 hours? That's a good one. The director gave her the smile one would give a child. Thank you. Since we have light-speed technology, the trip itself wasn't long, but we do like to ease you out of the sedation slowly. You weren't fed intravenously, but I assume you'll be hungry soon. Would you care for something to eat? Even though Mandy felt a slight rumble in her stomach at the mention of food, she shook her head. Light speed? Of course, we need to get brides from Earth to the station in the most efficient way possible, the director said, giving Mandy another smile. We don't use jump technology because it might drain you too much, and we want you feeling your best when you arrive. I know this is a lot to process, but you should know that it was an honor to be chosen by Doran. Mandy shook her head and felt like she finally snapped out of her daze. From what I remember, he didn't choose me. His brother did. And he didn't look too happy about it. Since he isn't into this, and I'm not into this, why don't we admit this was all a huge mistake? The director leaned back in her chair. Impossible. The documents have been signed. You and Dorn will be bonded and mated for life. Wow. Mandy looked at Raina to confirm how crazy this all was, but Raina's expression told her that it wasn't a joke. She stood. I'm not sure what kind of crazy government experiment this is, or why anyone thinks they can ship me off to some base or to marry a soldier, but I'm an American citizen and I have rights. I want to talk to a lawyer right now. I'm going to have your ass on a platter, lady. The director sighed and pressed a button on her desk. Like I explained, you're on the tribute station, also known as the Love Boat, or just the boat, which was built by the Drexians, who defended your solar system from the Chronox. You are a tribute bride, payment from Earth for this protection because the Drexian race no longer produces females, since only approximately half of your planet females are compatible, not to mention the ones who aren't healthy or fertile, and even fewer have the lack of social ties you do. You're very valuable. The shades on the window covering the wall behind the director began to rise. We will do everything within our power to make your stay here pleasant, but there are no lawyers who can help you. Her mouth quirked up at the corner. Or we'll put my ass on a platter, as you so eloquently put it. Mandy's mouth dropped as she... Mandy's mouth dropped as she took in the view of the black expanse of space dotted with stars. So the glimpses she'd seen earlier had truly been real? She focused on a ringed planet that looked vaguely familiar. The celestial body was close enough to her to make out the brilliant colors of the rings. Is that... Director King cast a look over her shoulder. Saturn? Yes. Isn't it breathtaking? Mandy's stomach flip-flopped, and the room around her began to spin. This couldn't be real, she told herself as she collapsed back down to the chair, and Raina began fanning her face with her inhuman fingers. Oh my god, my eyes. If you like what you hear and see, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon in the link below. And if you're on Gucci, feel free to drop a goo or two. All right. Chapter 7. Definitely done, brother, Cax said as they watched Mandy's retreating back. Okay, come on, eyes. Almost there. Dorn's shoulders sagged. He may not have been thrilled with his brother's choice for him. Excuse me. But he did not like the one being... Hold on. Excuse me. But he did not like being the one responsible for the hunt, for the hurt look that had crossed the female's face before she ran off. He spun around and jabbed a finger at his brother's chest. This is all your fault. Cax widened his eyes in mock surprise. I'm not the one who called her shrill and demanding. Dorn grunted and stalked across the room, jamming his hands deep into his pockets. Only because you made me so angry by bringing me here. Cax blew out a breath. Most Drexians will give their right arm to be matched with an attractive female and get to spend a few weeks of leave on the boat. Dorn knew this was true, but he wasn't most Drexians. The last thing he wanted was to become attached to someone else. He'd gone most of his life with as few emotional entanglements as possible, and had found it was easier that way, especially when you had to order ships into battle every day. If you didn't care for anyone, you couldn't lose them, although it wouldn't be incorrect to say he didn't care for his warriors. A vexling male, as tall and spineless as the blue-haired female, but with a shock of white hair instead, bustled into the room, then stopped abruptly when he saw the two hulking warriors. I was told to clean out the room. Go right ahead. Dorn knew the Vexling as the species that had always lived in tandem with the Drexians, doing all the caretaking and administrative jobs the warriors' race didn't wish to do. In exchange, the Drexians provided protection to their home world, much like they did for Earth. Unfortunately, the Vexlings were neither attractive to the Drexians nor biologically compatible. Cax came up behind him as the thin alien removed 2 trays from the table and bustled out again. You can't spend the rest of your life on the outskirts. I don't see why not. There's no law that I have to take a mate. Are you sure the medical team can't do anything for your condition? Cax crossed the table and picked up one of the small bottles before it could be removed, twisting off the cap and draining the water in one long gulp. Ready to fund a scientific study for me so you don't have to take my place? No. Is that an option? Doran said. The Vexler returned and headed for the food display again. Cax smiled weakly and shook his head. They say the odds are too low. No female, and our people won't waste an earthling on someone who is unable to. Doran felt his brother's pain as the usually proud warrior's shoulders slumped, and he sank into the couch. Doran sat next to him and thumped him on the knee. I'm sorry. More than you can know, you lucky bastard. The Vexling handed Doran a glass of bottle of water as he passed. You look like you'll be needing this. Doran took the bottle and watched the creature hurry out before settling down on the coffee table and staring at his brother. Cax's laugh was deep and real this time. I'm sure you are, but you understand why it falls to you. We can't let our line die out. Doran nodded. This was something that had been ingrained in both men since they were young. A Drexian warrior's lineage was the most important thing. The line of valiant fighters that stretched back for generations. Doran remembered but the chart of names that had hung on their wall, and his father pointed out each ancestor from House Barat and the battles they had won. His line could not die with him. He squeezed his brother's leg. Do not worry. I'll do my duty for both of us. What was that, cat? Cax shook a... Hold on, because my eyes are getting kind of fried. Holy shit. My eyes are getting kind of fried. My internet connection is getting somewhat questionable. Ooh-wee. Oops, sorry. Cax took a shaky breath. I know I can count on you. Our father would be proud if he could see you. Doran stood quickly and cleared his throat, biting back the urge to insist that his father would never be proud of him, could never feel anything for his youngest son. Not when he blamed Doran for his mother's death. It did not matter anyway. He was doing this for his brother, not for the father who'd never shown him any love. He was doing his duty for Cax and for his lineage. I guess I need to fix things with my mate then. Unless you want to throw her over your shoulder and drag her off to bed, Cax said, holding up his hands. Not that I'm recommending you do that. Give me a little more credit, Doran said. I have no intention of forcing her to come to me. Cax raised an eyebrow as he stood. So your plan is to use your charm on her? Doran ignored his brother's jibe. I will reason with her. I'm sure Earth females are reasonable creatures. Oh, you don't know these women very well, do you? Cax fell back down on the couch. We're doomed. Doran strode over to the doorway. If reason does not work, I have something else I can try. He allowed one corner of his mouth to turn up. You did say she wanted an ass that won't quit, right? Nice. Chapter 8. Welcome to the fantasy suite. Raina swept her bony arms wide as she stepped into the overwater bungalow. Like I mentioned before, I thought you'd enjoy the South Pacific environment the most. Mandy followed mutely behind her, still dazed by what she learned from Director Crean, and not completely convinced it was all an elaborate hoax. Although she couldn't imagine where in Los Angeles they could create such a realistic version of South Pacific Island. Ooh, excuse me. Her shoes clicked against the teak wood floors as she walked through a sitting area decorated with nut brown rattan furniture. Oh, good grief. Damn indigestion. And through glass sliding doors onto a balcony overlooking the most crystal blue water she'd ever seen. To one side was a private plunge pool, and on the other were wooden steps leading down into the ocean. But this couldn't be an actual ocean, could it? Wasn't this supposed to be a space station? Raina leaned against the gleaming railing next to her. You're probably wondering how we make this all so real. She didn't wait for a reply. For one, the station is very large. It can house thousands of individuals. Plus, we use sophisticated holographic technology. Like on Star Trek? Mindy asked, glad for once she paid attention to the geek that had babysit her when she was younger. Raina straightened up and beamed at her. A bit, but our system is more robust, and we don't have nearly the malfunctions they seem to have. Haha, boy. Also, we eliminated all the bothersome elements of the real locations. For instance, there are no bugs here and no bad weather. Mandy inhaled the scent of salt in the air as the turquoise water lapped against the steps. You call this a fantasy suite? What does that exactly mean? We've done a great deal of research on what Earth females like. We discovered that when a bachelorette is put into a fantasy suite, it increases the... Mandy stifled a laugh. Did you do research on humans by watching The Bachelor? Raina bobbed her head. Earthlings love The Bachelor. I guess there are worse things to copy. She looked over her shoulder into the bedroom, where the king-size four-poster bed, wow, was draped with a sheer canopy, and rose petals were arranged in the heart of on the white duvet. I think that's duvet. Are there any other shows that you use for research? Our development team is always looking for things humans like, Raina said. First, they drew inspiration from the Love Boat, which is what they named the station, although most of us just call it the boat now. But that show is so old, Mandy said. I guess that explains why you have women audition on a remake of the dating game. Raina cocked her head. Do Earthlings not like game shows anymore? Mandy sighed. Let's just say that one is a little outdated. Raina shrugged. We've been at this for nearly 30 years, hon, and we use classic media as well as new, adapting as we go. We used to have a Niagara Falls fantasy suite, but no Earth females want to go there anymore. Mandy took a step back. 30 years? You've been up here taking women from Earth for that long and no one's figured it out? Raina put her hand on her heart. We're very discreet, and we only take a few females at a time. So many women go missing every year on your planet that the ones we take as tribute are rarely missed. Mandy remembered the part Raina left out. They only took women with no family or friends to miss them. A lump formed in her throat. The blue-haired alien was right. No one would miss her. Even her thousands of followers would forget about her after a few days of not posting. She felt her hurt twisted into anger like it usually did. So what if I refuse all this? Mandy put her hands on her hips. You can't make me marry that brute. Even if you trick me into signing a contract, you can't trick me into walking down the aisle or sleeping with him. Raina's hands fluttered around her throat. Of course not. The choice is yours. Then if I choose not to stay, when do I go back home? The stylist's eyes shifted to the floor. Returning to Earth is not an option. You know too much already, and we can't risk you talking. If your planet knew about the Chronarch and the Drexians who protect you, and the tributes you provide in exchange, there would be mass hysteria. Mandy knew she had a point. What if I promise not to say anything? Or could you wipe my memory? We don't wipe memories. That's a detail your television got wrong. Raina touched a hand to her upswept hair. If you decline your mate, you will remain here and work on a station in some capacity. Work? Mandy crinkled her nose. Here? For the rest of my life? Not here. Raina made a circle with her index finger. You wouldn't live in a tribute suite. You'd be placed in workers' quarters on the other side of the station. Sounds like she'd be a slave. Like I said before, the station is huge. We have living quarters for newly married couples. The staff who worked on the station, the members of our high command of our high command when they're in session, and the humans who reject their matches. Not that you'd ever need to see that area. Workers' quarters? Neither part of that phrase sounded appealing, not when Mandy was used to an ocean view apartment in Malibu. She turned and walked back inside, sinking down into the ivory cushion atop a rattan, I guess it's rattan, I could be wrong, rattan chair. Her heels rested on the plexiglass rectangle in the floor that provided a peephole into the ocean below. She leaned forward and spotted a pair of yellow fish darting by. Either all of this was real and she was actually on some tricked-out alien space station, or she was losing her mind. "Why don't I leave you to rest for a bit?" Rena said. "If you want to swim, there's a selection of swimsuits in the drawers, as well as some loungewear for sleeping attire. The bathroom is fully stocked with toiletries if you'd like to take a shower or freshen up before meeting your planner." "My planner?" "Every tribute bride has a wedding planner assigned to her," Rena giggled, as if this should have been common knowledge. "We want to make sure you have the wedding of your dreams." "Will I see you again?" Mandy asked, suddenly feeling oddly attached to the creature who'd guided her thus far. Splotches of pinks. "Of course you will, hon. I'll be your liaison until the wedding. But I'm not a trained wedding planner. Not yet, at least. But don't you worry your pretty little head. Sergey is the best we have. You'll adore him." And with that, Rena was gone, slipping out of the door and leaving Mandy alone for the first time. She leaned back in the chair. Sergey? Her alien wedding planner was named Sergey? Maybe they were in LA after all, Mandy thought. This was just the type of name a wedding planner in Beverly Hills would have. She slipped her feet out of her heels and sighed. She'd been walking around them all day. Well, running, when she'd been trying to keep up with Rena. Actually, she didn't know if it was the same day. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she'd been sitting in the restaurant with London. Thinking of her former best friend brought back the feelings of hurt and embarrassment she felt when she'd been dumped. Mandy put her palms against her hot cheeks and closed her eyes. Forget about her, she told herself. She was a lousy friend anyway. If she was being honest with herself, all she'd ever had were lousy friends and loser boyfriends. The thought made her eyes sting with the threat of tears. Get it together, Mandy. She stood up and shook out her arms, feeling her stomach grumble. Was there a minibar in this suite? Scanning the room, she spotted a pair of square glass containers lined up on the credenza near the sliding glass door. She crossed to them and nearly let out a moan of pleasure when she recognized the cashews in one of the mixtures of golden and dark raisins in the other. She scooped up a handful of each and popped them into her mouth. Despite claiming to be a health food nut on her Instagram feed, Mandy was actually more of an M&M and gummy bear girl. But desperate times call for desperate measures. She devoured the nuts and raisins, opening the glass bottle of water next to them and taking a long swig. Now she wasn't hungry, but her nerves were still frayed. A shower. She felt better after a shower. She walked into the bathroom, pulling her dress over her head in a single motion and dropping it in a heap on the floor. She kicked it to the corner and glared at the pink ball of fabric. It might be designer, but it would always remind her of the day her best friend dumped her and her father cut her out of his life. She never wanted to see that thing for as long as she lived. She unhooked her lace bra and let it fall to the floor, then shimmied out of her matching panties and eyed the standing porcelain tub and the open marble shower. Both were next to glass doors that open out onto another deck, and had teak wood shades that could be pulled down for privacy. Mandy had never considered herself a prude, so she didn't bother with the shades as she touched a panel inside the shower and water rushed down. She stood under the warm cascade of the rainforest shower until she was sure her fingers were as wrinkled as prunes, letting water spill down her long hair and wash away the pain of the day. She felt like a new person when she finally turned off the water and wrapped herself in a fluffy white towel. She didn't notice a bathrobe anywhere and made a disapproving noise in the back of her throat. She needed to have someone send one down. She always made it a point to stay in hotels that provided bathrobes, and she wasn't about to make an exception now. She left the bathrobe and crossed to the dresser, opening the teak doors to reveal a series of drawers. She gave up trying to hold her towel with one hand and open the drawers with the other, letting the towel fall to her feet while she pawed through the clothes and inspected the labels. Halston, Gloria Vanderbilt, Calvin Klein. "Are they kidding with this?" she said. "How old are these clothes?" She threw a handful of bathing suits over her shoulder and paused when she didn't hear them hit the floor. She swiveled around to see if the huge man with dark hair and green eyes standing a few feet behind her. Brightly covered bikinis hung off his arms and head. But his gaze was the only thing that moved, his eyes taking in her full naked body, then locking with hers. All right. So now we are on chapter 9, and I will put a pin in it right there. Looks like that wraps it up for MidnightMan Reads. Tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time or 2 p.m. Eastern, if you recognize Eastern while you do Central Time, on Gucci and Twitch, as well as YouTube and Plexstorm if it works. And come hang out. I will be playing One Step from Eden again. The game was actually pretty fun. If you like what you hear and see, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon and in the description below, and drop a goo too if you're on Gucci.